is a fantasy action-adventure book about a gang of teenage fugitives on the run from their tyrannical king's hunters in a land of terrifying magic. Well, I've always been a fantasy fan. I grew up reading Harry Potter, Terry Pratchett, Eddings, all of the classics, Tolkien of course, so it was kind of expected that I was going to end up writing fantasy if I was going to end up writing. I went for the magic system because I wanted something that was sort of limited in an interesting way, because I think if there's a limit on the parameters of people's powers, it's a much more interesting story than if they have sort of infinite ability to do whatever magic they want, which is how I came up with the proclivity system, whereby each individual has their own unique sort of power and connection to the natural world, and that affects their magic. Yeah, my favourite character is Teddy Naught. He is a dastardly pickpocket and burglar, but he's got an interesting history to him as well, and he's got a little bit of depth. And I think that he's the most fun character to write, just for the comic relief, and someone for the more serious characters to play off as well. I probably wouldn't say too much about it and spoil the surprise, but it's. I wanted to write a fantasy story that had a romantic subplot, but that wasn't the entire crux of the story, because I found a lot of books I've come across recently, especially in YA, the fantasy is really what the romance is what the entire story is about. So I wanted to have a book that focused on friendship and other relationships, but then put a romantic relationship in there as well, in the context of wider friendship and relationships. I'd say that the book has an emphasis on the importance of friendship and looking out for each other. The main character has gone through a lot of trauma in her life, and she finds it difficult to reach out to people, and she sort of grows and changes as the book progresses, to the point where she feels as though she can connect with people and maybe even put her life at risk for the sake of others, which is a really huge step for her as a person. I think that something else I was going for when I was writing this story, I was studying human rights law at the time, and I was paying a lot of attention to the refugee debate, and I really wanted to write a story about refugees but put it into a fantasy context where it was a little easier to digest and to look at the sort of plight that people might go through and why they might struggle and take such risks to flee their homeland. So although it is just a fun fantasy story, I did want to put in something about that as well, something a little bit deeper. I would say that Danika is a rather emotionally scarred character. She's had a very difficult hard life, but she's a sort of person who struggles on. She doesn't give up. No matter what the world throws at her, she will endeavour to survive, and she will do what it takes to keep her heart beating for another second, essentially. And although the odds stacked against her in the book are incredibly difficult, she's a sort of character who manages to push through and find a way to keep surviving. And I found that was a really interesting character to write. Chasing the Valley is actually the first book in a trilogy. I'm working on the second and third instalments now, and I'm finding it really interesting to carry on a story arc have an individual story for each book, but also carrying it on through the series. And I really hope that this first book connects with some people and they want to read on and find out what happens to Danika and her friends after the curtain falls on the first book.